Welcome to Drive Time Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on NETT Radio, taking you above and beyond.
A historical reference of crucial significance to the Caribbean people. A record of the most inhuman voyage ever made by a people in the history of mankind. The Middle Passage. Of the ocean, while the ship sailing on and on and on to one destination, to the New World plantation, to the land of slavery, to the land of slavery. Man, we travel and we travel and we travel and we travel. Hey, we're traveling, traveling. Tell you, you can't move it, man. You can't move a captive muscle. You can't move a captive muscle in this stinking spaceship. Just hustling to market. Cause we pack up like living sardine. We pack up in a rusty tin. I tell you, full jamming, full jamming. Traveling, traveling. A ship a land in Guyana, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada. Look a ship a land in Jamaica. The other one gone Trinidad, Omeland. Look a ship a gone Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique and Antigua, Suriname, Cuba, America. The other one gone Trinidad, Omeland. And them big shark trailing and wailing, waiting in the bloody ocean, waiting in the bloody ocean. Waiting for a taste of the next black body. Get that they throw overboard. I tell you, man, overboard. We travel and we travel.
Yeah. Just giving you a little bit of what it was like on that Middle Passage. Music there of Brother Resistance in the background there. Hey everybody, welcome inside of the Drive Time Exchange. Of course, this is New Era TT Radio as we continue to take you above and beyond. As I said, this is the Drive Time Exchange, and this is where we are led by none other than journalist extraordinaire, Tony Fraser. Good day to you. All right, Tony, are you hearing me? All right.
Muted, Tony, muted.
All right, Tony, are you hearing me now? I don't know if your microphone in your end it's muted. I'm not hearing you at all. Mr. Liverpool, you hearing us all right, right?
I'm hearing you.
All right, and I'm getting you.
Tony look like he's muted.
Yeah, and like he's not realizing that either. Whew. All right, Tony, if you're hearing me, your microphone is muted. Something is going on. I'm not hearing him at all. Okay. Tony, are you hearing me now?
Tony is muted.
Let me see if I can check that.
Ever made by a people in the history of mankind. Stop that. Stop that. a historical reference of crucial significance to the Caribbean people. A record of the most inhuman voyage ever made by a people in the history of mankind. The Middle Passage.
All right, let's try it again. Tony, are you all right? Are you hearing me now?
You can't feel the motion.
Whew.
The motion of the ocean.
I don't know what is going on with Tony's microphone today.
Tony is muted, man.
Yeah. Well, Tony, if you're hearing me, at least I am not seeing you muted on this side, but for some reason I'm just not picking you up. All right, so people bear with us while we sort out this situation here.
A historical reference of crucial significance to the Caribbean people. A record of the most inhuman voyage ever made by a people in the history of mankind. The Middle Passage. Can't feel it, you can't feel it. You can't feel the motion of the ocean. While the ship sailing on and on and on to one destination, to the New World plantation, to the land of slavery, to the land of slavery. Man, we trouble and we trouble and we trouble and we trouble. Hey, we troubling. You can't move it. I tell you can't move it. Man, you can't move a captive muscle. You can't move a captive muscle in this stinking spaceship. Just hustling the market. Cause we pack up like living sardine. We pack up in a rusty tin. I tell you full jamming. Troubling. Look a ship a land in Guyana, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada. Look a ship a land in Jamaica. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Look a ship a gone Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique and Antigua, Suriname, Cuba, America. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Can't move a captive muscle. You can't move a captive muscle in this stinking spaceship. Just hustling the market. Cause we pack up like living sardine. We pack up in a rusty tin. I tell you full jamming. Troubling. Look a ship a land in Guyana, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada. Look a ship a land in Jamaica. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Look a ship a gone Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique and Antigua, Suriname, Cuba, America. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Can't move a captive muscle. You can't move a captive muscle in this stinking spaceship. Just hustling the market. Cause we pack up like living sardine. We pack up in a rusty tin. I tell you full jamming. Troubling.
Right, try now.
I'm in Guyana, St. Vincent, St. Lucia.
Getting me now?
Look a ship a land in Jamaica. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Look a ship a gone Dominica, Guadeloupe, Martinique and Antigua, Suriname, Cuba, America. The other one gone Trinidad, Omanad. Can't move a captive muscle. You can't move a captive muscle in this stinking spaceship. Just hustling the market. Cause we pack up.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for staying with us here on your TT Radio. And sometimes these things happen like that. 1 minute they're working good, and next minute they just start to give a whole lot of trouble. But I think we got it sorted out. So let's try it again. Tony, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you, Chalo. How was that?
Very much, a lot better. Good to have you.
Okay. Yeah, the technology sometimes takes its own course and goes its own way.
Yeah, it does its own thing at
We're
times.
glad to be back. And I see Professor Liverpool very much there. How are you, sir?
Not too bad, but I must give you a joke that no, there's a famous writer who said that black people and technology don't mix, you know.
Yeah, we fighting up with the people thing, you know. So these things happen. Yeah. Incidentally, congratulations! I saw you in the newspaper receiving an award from the Emancipation Support Committee.
Oh yes, long overdue.
Yeah, for your work over the decades. You know?
I'm saying so because I have been singing in the Emancipation Committee for people who started Calypso long after me, except years after, and I could even touch the songs that I have sung, the many songs. Nobody has sung an Emancipation song like me, nobody. And yet, nobody ever awarded me. But I still thank it.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to wait at the door for a while. Yeah. I think I remember Kitchener being offered some minor award and he refused it, right?
Yeah. Kitchener refused the national award.
Yeah. I think they were giving him a Chaconia, and he said in his mind he was. Yeah. Leroy Clark also went down that road. Leroy refused to take whatever they were offering him at that time. So sometimes people have to go through these motions. Nevertheless, we're here this afternoon to talk about this whole business of emancipation. Happened 187 years ago when the proclamation was read, declaring that the slaves, the African slaves, or the Africans who were made slaves were free, and therefore over the decades, the century, almost 2 centuries that have transpired, what we want to do is to talk a little bit about how have those decades, hundreds of years gone by, and what has happened with the African population. Of course, we will focus on the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago, but emancipation at different points in times, as surely Professor Hollis Liverpool, historian, will tell us all about it in the Americas, in the Spanish Caribbean, and so on at different points in times. But we are concentrating on emancipation in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, and elsewhere. The whole concept of, first of all, imprisoning a people and then, quote unquote, freeing them. Your first take. Incidentally, we are still waiting for 2 other participants. Dr. Aakeil Murray of the History Department of the University of the West Indies, and Clyde Weatherhead, well-known attorney, activist, former trade unionist, and somebody who has written on a period in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, something of a small booklet determining a period. It's around the early 60s, and the club called Pegasus and so on. So Clyde is well known in that. So Charles, as soon as they come into the frame, let them into the discussion. So let's start.
Definitely. One worry for you. I don't know, Dr. Liverpool, if you have like a speaker or something, somebody's speaker is just a little too loud coming back at us. Yeah.
My speaker is normal, what I usually use.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I think he's talking about somebody have on a radio or something like that.
Yeah, like if you have something monitoring, it's a little loud. Like if your desktop speakers or something, if you could just probably lower that a little bit.
Speaker, let me see if I can try something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot better there, whatever it is.
I've lowered everything in my speaker.
Yeah. But once you can hear us, you're hearing us okay?
I'm hearing you very good.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Wonderful.
So, Professor, let's start off. And of course, Professor goes both as professor and calypsonian, singing about Black identity and all of those things. Your take on emancipation after 180 plus years, how does it come across? How have people taken it over the period of time?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you started off by saying about different islands in the Caribbean, etc., because that was the first misconception that many boys study, or many Africans study celebrating emancipation. They forget, or either they forget or they don't seem to realize that different nations in the Caribbean had different dates for emancipation. And what we're doing in Trinidad here is celebrating the British emancipation, which is 1834, 1838, and 1834, and then 1838 we were freed with apprenticeship. But other islands in the Caribbean had different dates for emancipation. For example, the French, way back in 1848, and if you feel that is harsh, the Dutch were 1863. And when I went to the Virgin Islands to teach, I realized that in 1848 they got their freedom, 10 years after us in Trinidad. You see? And then if you want to bring more bacchanal as it were, the Americans were here in 1816, long before that, and they were supposed to be freedmen, but yet they met a country that was enslaved still. And if you go down more, you can get Peru and Brazil. They are way down in 1888, and Cuba, and so that sometimes one of the things that I think what we have to do in Trinidad and Tobago is to make Africans here understand that emancipation took place in different islands and different dates and differently, and so that you have to say first, what are you celebrating? Because you don't just say emancipation. That's a wide topic, a very, very wide topic, and it brings all kind of different histories into it. So we have to understand that first. It's a real misconception to say that that Africans were all Africans, and then look at all Africans were not freed. Even in Trinidad, all Africans were not freed. 6-year-olds were not freed. No emancipation. Only 6 years to be freed in 1838. You have to be 6 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kept little children as still as slaves, still enslaved in Trinidad and Tobago. And then when we say, and then sometimes when they say the British boast and say we freed 800,000 Africans in the British Caribbean, but that 800,000 it means that it also took in Canada and South Africa. So that's why it looks like plentiful, but you're taking about thousands of people in South Africa and thousands of people in Canada, all of them facing emancipation. So
Yes.
we have to get our figures correct.
Yes, and of course there were different roads to emancipation. There were people who had to purchase their freedom.
Correct, correct. You see, so emancipation is a very complex thing, very, very complex thing. And if you don't understand history, you can't understand it, And then what about the paying off giving them paying off the planters? The amount of money, the millions they paid for planters. Africans didn't get a penny. Not a penny.
And they were put out on the road, as it were, without too much to go with, by way of their own, if you like, the needs of the day. They were out in the wild and so on and so on. Okay.
Yeah, Aakeil is here. Good.
Right. So I see our second guest, Dr. Aakeil Murray of the University of the West Indies, coming into the picture now. Welcome and thanks for coming into our discussion.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Fraser.
Right.
Liverpool, good to have you. Good to see you.
Blessings, man. Welcome.
Yeah,
I would like to see young historians.
Yeah. You have to call your professor, but you have to call me Tony, right? I just simple
Okay.
with you. Right? Makes me feel more comfortable when you call. So we were chatting, engaging the discussion, Professor Liverpool and myself, about the whole business of the emancipation of people. And Professor was making the point that emancipation took place at different times and under different circumstances in different parts of the hemisphere,
Yes.
if you like. But your initial take on the whole subject of emancipation.
Yeah, perhaps I could start off by saying that largely, even though it would have been given at different times across the Caribbean, the main thing is whether we fought, took it, or whether it was given to us. And there's much debate in scholarship on, the work of the enslaved themselves in terms of both violent and non-violent resistance over the time, and how that played into weakening the system from an economic standpoint, and also bringing attention to the barbaric nature of it socially as well, leading to its demise. But largely from the political standpoint, across the British West Indies, largely taking out Haiti, of course, we can argue largely, I would say, that emancipation and that level of freedom was handed, given to the enslaved. And because of that issue, that also leads into the issue of independence being handed as being given as well. Um, it has been a gradual turnaround, one that perhaps we can say we have made significant progress, but not as much as we could have made in terms of rebranding and reclaiming ourselves as people of African descent, because there was no grand revolution that led to that change. So take, for instance, Haiti. Yeah, Haiti was called Sandoma, right? Winning their independence, their freedom from enslavement, they decided to change the name to Haiti, the original name given to the land by the indigenous peoples. When in the British West Indies we won our independence, names of the islands remain the same. So that's just one example of how that radical change post emancipation did not occur. But we, over time, we have been making those strides and those changes. So that's my initial input
All
on
right.
it.
And we're going to come to that point of over the period of time. But let me go back. You said something, and I want to engage Professor Liverpool and yourself on this matter. There has been an argument for a long time that emancipation was forced upon the British, and there was a contention amongst the British parliamentarians of the time as to whether or not emancipation should take place. Join that argument, Professor Liverpool and Dr. Murray.
Good, but the British had a different idea of what is emancipation. They saw emancipation as just changing your bosses, changing from one planter to another, and they felt that you were free. The African people had a different idea of emancipation, a totally different idea of emancipation. They didn't see just bosses changing. They saw their whole birthright changing, and that's why the important thing about emancipation I like to stress is that culture in the Caribbean, where people in the Caribbean went to Africa and peeped into Africa and pulled from Africa. Barbadians pulled from Africa and pulled from Barbados and pulled from the English and form a complete new culture. And that's the importance of emancipation. So we in Trinidad pulled from the French and we pulled from the Spanish and we pulled from all different areas and we pulled from the Amerindian and we copied our patois, etc. And that is the crux of emancipation, that cultural mix that we took. In other words, most people feel that slaves came naked, but when they came with their culture and they came with the African culture, and that is what emancipation is all about. That's the crux. that everybody is different because everybody dipping into Africa, dipping into their own background and coming up with something. That is the crux of emancipation.
Dr. Murray, one of the contentions is that emancipation was forced upon the British government as it was no longer a viable option, and therefore they were hurried to get out of it. Something like independence, 160 years after, when it was no longer provision to keep these colonies hanging around their necks. Your take on that? Incidentally, I see Clyde Weatherhead coming into the picture. Clyde, thanks for joining us, and we're going to come to you in a second. Yes, Dr. Murray.
Yes, so I would say, based on my knowledge of the issue, is that there is clear evidence that it may have been something forced, but I also see that it was something that seemed to be going to happen. It was gradually making strides towards that. You had in the early 19th century, talking the early 1800s here, in emancipation in British West Indies, officially 1834, you saw the British government implementing significant pieces of legislation, Registration Act, to ensure that all the enslaved were accounted for on estates, and also to keep an eye on if a slave is no longer accounted for, what is the reason for that? You had the amelioration policy as well, where living conditions for the enslaved had to be improved, and that would have been, I think, 1823. I think Registration Act was 1816. Yeah. So you had these significant pieces of legislation being passed in the early 1800s that sort of signal that something was happening in Britain in terms of the mindset of the politicians and leaders at play, that this system, needed to be phased out, whether it be economic, as Dr. Williams would have argued. We can argue that as well. Whether it be humanitarian, as other historians would have argued, we can consider that as well. But it seems to be that in the mind of the British, enslavement was something to be phased out by the time we get to the beginning of the 1800s. And of course, we can't forget the abolition of the slave trade, which was the initial call. The initial call was not for the abolition of slavery, but for the abolition of the slave trade. And that sort of set things in motion moving forward. In terms of it coming up on the British in an unprepared manner, what one could argue is the apprenticeship system. The apprenticeship system was not really well planned out. It was sort of an ad hoc system put in place. And this was because the planters, of course, knowing that emancipation was upon them, wanted some compensation for the laborers that they were going to lose. And so the British were pressured into finding a way to compensate them in the Emancipation Act itself, but also to allow them to have their laborers still attached to the plantation, for them to get time to adjust to wage labor. So the ad hoc nature in which the apprenticeship system was set up means that things weren't really fully thought out, and it begs the question if there was a lot of consultation before emancipation occurred. Yeah, that's my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah. And of course, there was a contention of East India sugar becoming far more efficient than that sugar produced in the West Indies. So the point is that there were a number of factors that played into this whole business of emancipation. Clyde Weatherhead, your take, we're talking about the initial movement towards emancipation and how it was driven. Your take on it all. Clyde's microphone seems to be off.
Yeah, Clyde's microphone seems to be off.
Or he's not hearing or something like that. Yeah, technical problems seem to be assailing us today. Anything you can do there, Charles?
I'll check. I'm checking. I'm checking.
Okay, so he's checking in the meantime. So let's move forward from the basis that one, it came upon the British authorities. There were other factors which were leading towards it, and there was some humanity involved, the Quakers and so
Right.
on.
But let me just add a point to what
Sure.
that Dr. Murray was saying just now there, that
Yeah.
you know that Britain was saying that there was no money in in slavery, and proof of it is that when people say that Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and 1808, Denmark abolished the slave trade even before 1792, because so Denmark saw no money also. And Denmark was saying that we have to get rid of this slave trade and the slavery long before Britain. They were saying all these things. And then when you come to apprenticeship, Dr. Revere, when I went to UE, Dr. Revere said everybody knew the question we was going to get. Everybody knew the question you'll get at the end examination. Hey, Dr. Revere question. The apprenticeship scheme was a scheme discussed. All of us had to do it. Every single year you bring in that. The apprenticeship scheme was a scheme discussed. So we knew it. So all persons in UE knew to say, yes, it was a scheme. And you have to show how it was a scheme. Because it was a scheme.
Yes. Clyde, are you hearing us now?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Are you hearing me?
Okay. No, loud and clear now.
Okay, great.
The technology seems to be following us around the problems
Not
with the
just technology. I just took half an hour to get here, which normally takes me 5 minutes.
All right. Well, that's part of development, right?
holiday spirit, I imagine.
Yeah. So your
Question
initial take
of
on this
why
subject.
emancipation took place, why the abolition of the slavery. I think it's a number of factors. Um, Part of the factor, one major factor would have been the resistance of the slaves over time.
Correct.
And when we look at the situation in Tobago and the situation like Belmana riots, the question of Dada and other people leading the flight of the slaves for freedom in this country. So that is one aspect. The question of how profitable was it in terms of the sugar industry and the contribution it was making to the development of capitalism in Britain at the time. And of course, you had the Haitian Revolution that had taken place, which also weakened the whole system. So I think it was a combination of things that led to the decision to abolish the slave trade and slavery. There's a little difference between Trinidad and Tobago situation because this notion of apprenticeship applied more in Trinidad than in Tobago. And in Tobago, what developed with the abolition of slavery was a meterage system, a kind of sharecropping system
And kids also.
between the slaves and the ex-slave masters. It's also interesting that some years ago, doing some work in Tobago with respect to land titles, we discovered that there were wills left by slave owners leaving property to ex-slaves. So the Tobago development was a little different from the Trinidad development post-emancipation.
On the Tobago scene, it just reminded us Susan Craig discovered some very thrifty and productive women who were purchasing their freedom not only for themselves but their husbands, whether it was in the form of legality or not. It was husbands and children out of the situation. So yeah, Tobago had a little bit of a difference. Professor Liverpool, let's start now talking about how they freed the emancipated African made progress over the decades post the Emancipation Declaration?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I began by saying that one of the important things about emancipation that we have to stress, especially people today who are celebrating emancipation, is to look at culture, because all the whole Caribbean went into the past. First, they went into their experiences in Barbados or Grenada or St. Martin, etc. Pull from that, then look into Africa and pull from Africa what is the birthright from Africa, and they mix it up and they all produce. They came up with new areas of culture. So that those emancipation to a large extent is that development of culture. So let's take we in Trinidad with our patois, and Grenadians with their patois in a different way, and the Virgin Islands different. All of them have their patois, but different in terms of language, and in terms of religion, and in terms of music. So all Caribbean have different musics that they're developing. So we have music in Martinique different. The French are different to the Africa, to the English, and English different. Music different from Santo Domingo, etc. And all of us are pulling from our native country plus Africa, mix it up and coming up with something. And emancipation, it was the time when Africans in the Caribbean gave us that onslaught of culture in the Caribbean. And sometimes we forget that. And that's one of the things that we have to celebrate, because that made us Caribbean people, that made us our civilization different. Our culture is what makes it different. And we are very strong on that. Very, very strong on that. And we have to keep that going.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Murray, I find that to be a very rich point made by Professor Liverpool, of course, given his own adaptation in the cultural sphere.
Yes.
That one of the ways out, if I read him correctly, to survive was to turn to the culture. Your take on that, Dr. Murray?
Yes, I definitely agree with Professor Liverpool. If I could add something to what you would have said, it would be the fact that before emancipation and immediately after, we also had a number of free Africans coming to labor. Those that were those illegal slave ships sometimes that were intercepted by the British naval forces, and persons were given the opportunity. You come to the British West Indies and work for free. So not many of us, but a number of us in the region, particularly I would say Trinidad, and to some degree British Guyana as well. Within our blood is free. It's free Africans, not just enslaved Africans, and so that would have significantly aided in cultural tension today, because some of them were able to come and practice their culture. Of course, given the context of a British colony, there would have been a number of limitations, right? But the reality is that those restraints that were on them were on their fellow men during enslavement, was not on them from a cultural standpoint. So Orisha faith, for instance, has survived. Rather, practitioners have been sort of incorporated now under Orisha. And so the prominence of those religious expressions in the arts as well, the calypso and so on, they were helped significantly by those free laborers that came. Maybe I can put my particular emphasis for now, even though it's not an area that I tend to focus on, and it would be business. During enslavement,
okay, Dr. Murray, just hold on for that.
Okay, sure.
I see that as an exciting area to develop as we go on. But just to stick a little bit there, I think the point has to be made, and anyone can respond to it, is that the slavery and subsequently emancipation in the different territories of the Caribbean were different. Because you had the older colonies like Jamaica and Barbados and so on, long entrenched in the plantation system, while Trinidad and Tobago, the Spanish were said to be not too interested in this business of planting. They wanted gold from the thing. So let's hear you on that, gentlemen.
But on that point, if I could add, one of the things we want to write once, or we who are markers of the Caribbean history, is that all the fruits in the Caribbean, the Caribbean people have taken all those fruits and have added their different names to it because of where they pulled from. So what they call Kenneth and Kenneth, other countries call them by different names because we took all those fruits and we named them differently, especially from where where we came from. And we took all the bushes, all the bush and all the bush medicine, and we all named them different. The Guyanese call it man piaba, woman piaba, and we call them differently. We name all those bushes, etc. And they took all those things. So all the islands took that culture. They named them differently because all of them are different in the sense that they add different things to them. So how we make punji is not how they make punji in Jamaica. Jamaicans add punji, they put the emphasis on the okra, and the Virgin Islands put the emphasis on cornmeal, etc. And when we make fry bake, they make fry bake in the Virgin Islands, and they call it fried dumpling, and all of them took it differently. And all of us are doing the same thing differently, adding different things to our structure. And that's the beauty of emancipation.
When I went to Mona and I started talking to my Jamaican friends about Pomsite, they were saying, well, what kind of stupidness you talking there about? That's Chinese, don't know that. Right? June plum. Go ahead, Clyde.
Development post-emancipation is one aspect of it, because part of the fight against slavery was the fight to reclaim what people were denied in terms of if you are somebody's property, you're not a human being. So the reclaiming of humanity necessarily requires that people try to reclaim culture. So even when we come right up to today, that we see the rubber mask, and we have a Calypsonian who calls himself that he's the Bajan Calypso nowadays, and these things trace back to the question of the griot and that culture coming out of West Africa and so on. But the culture itself is one aspect. The other aspect is the migration from the plantations into areas like around Port of Spain and so on. And what developed there was a kind of economy. I hear people talking about you don't have no African businessmen in Trinidad or some crap like that. But if we go back to the turn of the century, in terms of the coming into the 1900s, a lot of business places in Port of Spain were African owned. And along with that, you had developments of various movements within the country, including the, well, it may be a bad word to some people, but the Negro Welfare Cultural and Social Association that was led by John Barrett and Christina King, his wife, and Elmer Francois and others. And coming beyond emancipation itself was the actual celebration of emancipation, which the British then tried to get rid of by declaring August 1st to be Discovery Day. So that had to be reclaimed. So Barrett and they used to organize, it's like treats then for the children in Port of Spain as part of the emancipation celebration. And many other people did that. And, coming right up to more recent time, that Lancelot Lane Kebu almost single-handedly fought to have the holiday declared. I remember Lance flagging down car, taking mopping drop and going about the place, organizing school children, going to lecture them about emancipation and so on, and organizing a national children's parade in Port of Spain without a cell phone, without a car of his own, and stuff like that. So the recovery of emancipation celebration itself was one of the developments. And
Okay.
certainly in Tobago, beyond the Metayage period, there was the development of a number of businessmen in Tobago who became major businessmen on that island, including the man they call the Chuck. When he came to Trinidad to organize as well, but he was himself a Tobagonian businessman. The other representatives, one was a druggist and things like that.
Mhm. All right. So, Clyde, I want you at a later point to talk specifically about the road of emancipation adopted by the labor movement from the turn of the century, turn into the 20th century, and the contribution that was made by the labor movement and some significant labor leaders along the way. But let me go back to Dr. Murray. You wanted to bring us up to something of a modern state of emancipation. Go ahead.
Okay, I think I was referring to the fact that people of African descent are still heavily involved in business. There's this myth that has been bandied about, particularly immediately after emancipation, that people of African descent were lazy. And of course, that was the planters' narrative to get the British government to give them cheaper labor instead of paying the former enslaved the wages that they were negotiating for. But just as Mr. Weatherhead would have pointed out, we people of African descent have been involved in business, strongly so, and very eminently so in the 1900s, and even in today's society. When if anyone asks me or mentions that claim that African people are lazy, and some people of African descent even have that belief, as you just walk down Charlotte Street. All right, there's a lot of endeavor, there's a lot of business taking place, and that's the reality. Could we be involved more in terms of organizing large corporations and larger businesses, of course, and that will require networking and all of these things. But in terms of small businesses, micro businesses, medium-sized enterprises, largely people of African descent are very much involved in that. I just wanted to bring that to the fore.
Yeah. But Dr. Murray, somebody can argue that whereas, and I know some of those things you talk about because I grew up between Belmont and downtown Port of Spain, and I knew all the little shops, the Blackman tailor shop on Abercrombie Street, etc., etc. That initial start just seems to have dissipated over a period of time, and instead of being on bigger buildings now, you still have the market vendors hustling, as it were, on Charlotte and George Streets, and other people, and this is not an indictment against anybody, but other people have moved into the stores.
Yeah. But let me add something to that this argument now. Let me add something to that.
Sure.
When UTT started, all the fellows in UTT were supposed to do some research and write and produce a book on their research. All of them. That's why they made them fellows. And Selwyn Ryan wrote about the freed African. And Selwyn Ryan found that from, I forget the name of the book now, that from Port of Spain to Sandy Grande, right up to Sandy Grande, all the shops, all the businesses that in that area were African people. African people rule the roost in business from Port of Spain to Sandy Grande. And Selwyn Ryan, that is documented by Selwyn Ryan in his book. It's a book that people don't go by.
Yeah. Actually, this is it. This is it here. This is it right here on my shelf at the side. He's talking about entrepreneurship in Trinidad and Tobago, the Black experience.
Black experience. Yeah. It's something that our people don't look at, and people talk about emancipation. They don't look at that. All these things. So I'm glad you raised the point, Murray, about Dr. Murray, about business, because business was not just Port of Spain, was the whole Eastern Caribbean, the whole road going up to Sandy Grande was only business.
How could that, and anyone who wants to take on the question can respond, conceive of uh, the, the, the ex-slave being put out on the road, and Sparrow's slave comes to my mind, the language I don't remember immediately, put out on the road without too much, without anything, but within what 50, 60 years thereafter, there was this kind of development and movement forward by the emancipated Africa. Responses, anyone?
Well, I
I
spoke
would
about
say,
Sparrow Slave in Sparrow, but that calypso by Sparrow Slave. That's a work of art. But that's a beautiful song because it captures. It's timely and timeless. One can sing it in the morning and understand slavery, how it began, and Sparrow captured that. I use that for people who say that Sparrow should not be given the ORTT. I say you can make. I use the lemmas. You can make slave. You could sing that calypso as Sparrow sing, but what is slave? If you could compose that, then you also guaranteed a ORTT. Yeah, Sparrow's calypso.
Yeah, Dr. Murray, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say is that skill and industry was always within the African. A number of them taken from West Africa were very much involved in the industries, the burgeoning industries in their regions of West Africa. And coming across here would have been the same. You had a number of enslaved persons who have actually been documented with their skills being um, hired out by their owners, where they would send them to the urban centers to work and get an income for themselves and give a portion of that income to their owners, quote unquote masters. So even, of course, the planters were aware that some of their enslaved had significant skills, trade skills and other skills. And so to say that they were just put out, uh, probably in a sense in Sparrow's own way, in terms of the material items that they would have left with would have been minimal. And we know that they weren't compensated by the British government either. But in terms of that industry and skill, they just put it to use outside of the plantation. And so that is how we would have seen that development over time. Of course, the British tried to pass laws putting land, claiming land as crown lands, and then putting laws in place to avoid squatting and so on, to frustrate their industry. But they fought against it, and one of the major ways in which they were able to do that, as I mentioned before, would have been networking and pooling funds and utilizing some of our financial skills like susu and so on, so that they can purchase land and get involved in business on their own. So maybe, as you mentioned, Tony, seeing that this would have been the state as Salomon would have researched back then, and we can see perhaps a dwindling of that. Maybe we need to go back to that networking together in business.
In fact, there are some interesting pictures in the book. This first one that I'll show you is not a very clear one, but what it does, a little bit of irony there. It's a black one, really. Some businessmen, some groups of businessmen, people like Dupree and Monsanto. You can't see the names, as I said. It's not a great picture, not very clear. But this was a board of directors of some black companies, and of course inside some others. But Clyde, you wanted to come in and talk about this.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, when we look at it, what happened to the colony of Trinidad and Tobago beyond the emancipation? What happened to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago beyond emancipation? If the Africans moved away to the more urban areas, some would have stayed in rural areas, but no longer in sugar. They have operated on the estates in cocoa and so on along the northern range, which might account for the presence of African businessmen, as Chucky just said, along the east-west corridor as well.
Yeah.
So the the nature of the economy changed. In Tobago, the sugar industry, remember, went through a whole collapse in some later years, and so that people were forced to literally earn a living away from sugar, and many artisans and businessmen arose in Tobago as well, partly because of that. Then in Trinidad, we would have had the phenomenon of the introduction of indentured labor that literally remain on the sugar estates. And if you take areas like take Tunapuna for example, Tunapuna along the Eastern Main Road is divided into to two different towns. On the northern side is Tunapuna and the southern side is Paje. And that has to do with the fact that the sugar industry was there, the indentured were connected to that. And on the northern side, you had the African people who were no longer connected to that sugar industry in the same way. A few of them still work there, but the majority of them were not there anymore. And they had to develop different economic means to survive. So that the development of Kora and these areas in terms of cocoa estates and agriculture that was carried out by former African enslaved people. All of these developments, even in a same town area,
Yeah.
we had different developments taking place at the same time.
And
That's
Clyde, you could say the same thing for Diego Martin. Diego Martin had the same thing with the Indians are and the Africans. But you know, Tony, what one thing we must do and Dr. Murray is that we don't teach our children many times, because I see it even in the master's course. When I ask somebody Susu, they don't know nothing about Susu. They don't know nothing about society card. And that is something that we have to sit down and discuss and teach children, because people going to universities nowadays and don't know what Susu. They don't know about the society card, how it was organized. It was a national organization. How to get that money, because if you don't have your society card, and if you're not financial, you're worse than the devil in hell.
Yeah.
If you don't get that card, and that card is not financial, and you have to come every week and pay a penny and 3 cents on that card, and people died. Africans in Trinidad died just to pay that society card. It meant so much to them. They sell pig to pay the card to get society card.
You know,
I remember as a child having to go to pay my grandmother's card contribution in the lodge.
Yeah.
The thing is, and one of the things you see, we focus on Trinidad a lot, but in Tobago today I was just talking to a client in Tobago, and she was fired from her job, and so I'm asking her, "Have you gotten a new job? What about self-employment?" She said, "You want a bandit come by my door?" so, and even the notion of lend hand in Tobago and these cooperative ways among the African people, those things have evaporated because now the THA become the big employer in Tobago, and the only place you can get work is with the THA and that kind of stuff. It's like in Trinidad, many people ended up in the civil service, and well, in the early days of teaching, what is interesting is that the teachers, the Triple TU, the Trinidad and Tobago Teachers Union, was founded by rural Indian Presbyterian teachers.
You know, the society card is an interesting one. That my mother, who was Indian, sent me to pay her society card. I remember the 25 cents. Hillen Lane in Belmont, there was a Hillen Lane Society or whatever else. The building is still there, but the society no longer exists. But Hillen Lane Society was a big thing, and we were in Belmont, and I had to go and pay the society card. You know, I don't know what became of that, but she always told us that when she passed on, we could get the money from the Hill and Lane Society to pay for her funeral. Well, we had moved a little bit beyond that when she eventually passed, but it was a significant thing. And of course, Susu, she used to be in a Susu in Oxford Street. So all of these things are very important things. And we're going to get to the point of where slippage has taken place in that culture that was set down for us by the ancestors. But let's take a break now, Charlo, and talk about the station where people can get it, and whatever advertising we have at the present time.
Flair Auto Services Limited, your one-stop auto repair shop, located at number 1 Industrial Lane, Flair, right opposite the brewery on the Eastern Main Road. Yes, we do it all. Repairs to all makes and models, from your everyday sedan to SUVs, light trucks, pickups, and panel vans. We're also the sole distributors of Davanti tires, certified VTS inspection station, plus a wide range of services: oil change, front end and suspension repairs, tune-ups, tire alignment, batteries, electrical work, radiator and cooling system, AC repairs, and accessories galore. We offer pickup and drop-off service too. Call us today at 662-6545 or 662-6572. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Flair Auto Services Limited, number 1 Industrial Lane, Flair. We do it all.
Men, women, tired of the invasive, painful old methods of testing prostate and breasts?
The Institute of Health and Fitness Clinic and Wellness Center offers comprehensive and non-invasive diagnostic testing, which indicates the nature and extent of diseases and tests your nutritional levels. Our quick testing can identify early signs of problems by evaluating many of the bodily functions, such as male and female sexual function, gastrointestinal function, liver function, kidney function, thyroid function, heart and brain function, and also cancer testing. Results are comparable with other medical lab tests without the use of needles or embarrassing specimen cups, and is pain-free. We also offer all natural treatments. Visit us now at number 79 St. Vincent Street, Tunapuna, or call 492-7397 or 289-6363.
Advertise with us on New Era TT Radio, the fastest growing streaming platform for talk in Trinidad and Tobago. Audio and video ads welcome. Elevate your brand with us. Connect with us at newerattradio@yahoo.com or call us at 299-5156. Now, what are you waiting for?
All right, everybody, and of course, I'll welcome you back to the Drive Time Exchange. Of course, you're listening to New Era TT Radio, and you are listening on newerattradio.com and New Era TT Radio on TuneIn, so you can get us on your Alexa and, of course, all of your Google devices. And remember, throughout the day, you can, especially in our morning segment, we go to M&E TV, which takes us to Flow, Digicel, Amplia, and Treecore in the morning between 6 and 8 a.m. Monday to Friday. Well, of course, not tomorrow. Tomorrow being the holiday. And yes, you can advertise with us right here on New Era TT Radio. Just give us a call, 281-1315. So, Tony, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Charlo. And we resume the discussion. With us, we have Professor Hollis Liverpool, known also as Chalkless, and, Chalky. In that realm, I have a calypso, one of your calypsos for you to remind us about, but not right now. We have Clyde Westerhead, attorney at law, trade union, well-known trade union leader, sometimes a politician, perhaps not in recent times, and Dr. Aakeil Murray of the University of the West Indies, the history department, of that university.
Yeah. Well, Tony, it looks like Dr. Liverpool has fallen over. I don't know if he will join us, but for now he went out. Mhm.
Okay, so we hopefully he'll come back to us because I particularly want him to talk about some of his own calypsos in which he um, dealt with the issue of the emancipated African and so on. Let me go to Dr. Murray to talk about coming into the 20th century and coming into the period when the emancipated African in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. Uh, what was his statement like? And when I say statement, I mean his attitude, or how he worked, how he lived, etc., and so on. Tell us something about that.
I think still with colonial mindset largely, still believing in as being still believing in being a British subject, since we would have been socialized in that manner. You would have seen that with the Windrush generation after World War II, there was this hope, this belief that going to Britain and being a British subject will give you all of the opportunities that other white British citizens would have been afforded. So being engaged World War I, World War II, that would have been something that was still permeating the man of African descent across the Caribbean in that time. I also think, though, that there was a hope and a call for political representation, more political representation. That was definitely a part. And then some even argue that, we had the earliest formation of a political party during that 1920s period of time with Cipriani and others.
But if you go back to and Clyde can join this also. For instance, the Working Men's Association had a turn into the century. I don't know if you could call it a formal political party, but it was dealing with the politics of the era.
Yes.
But the Working Men's Association, Tony, these days there was a big debate about whether trade unionists should be involved in politics. When you look at the Working Men's Association, it was not a trade union, nor was it a political party, but it was involved in both.
Most, yeah.
So, because the question was, you're dealing with the colonial system and how to fight it. So you have to fight it on the economic front, you have to fight it on the political front, you have to claim rights that you don't have. And then you had the emergence of the oil industry beginning at the turn of the century. And so there were new challenges. So that the question of the Working Men's Association, it was a political trade union kind of organization that also did social welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So that beyond that, you had the Negro Welfare Cultural and Social Association, which also dealt with politics, culture, social issues, etc., and fought for many rights. So when people think of Elma Francois, she was connected with the NWCSA. She was organizing in the north when Butler was organizing in the south. And in those days, of course, nobody had a cell phone. They didn't even have a telephone. But the communication had to be that physical human beings had to leave one part of the country to go to the next one so they could coordinate stuff.
Yeah.
And
we don't normally usually think about, to add to that, the trade union movement, the waterfront workers at the end of 1919, 20, and so on. We don't normally think of that as emancipation efforts, but when it crossed my mind a moment ago, that was part of the emancipation movement forward, wasn't it?
Of course.
Yes.
And the reaction to it was the Sedition Act.
Okay.
Imposed by the colonial power. And at the same time, you had people emerging in Tobago calling for representation in the LegCo. and stuff like that. So the whole national picture, sometimes we behave as though the two islands we are on here is like one in the North Pole and the next one in the South Pole. You only a few miles apart. And remember the creation of the THA in Tobago as a political institution is a completely different thing from the crown colony system that existed in Trinidad. And we still haven't found a way for the two of us to actually be together in one nation called Trinidad and Tobago yet.
Dr. Murray, take up the whole business of the post-emancipation movement towards self-government, which started in the 1930s with different groups and individuals and so on, as part of the effort to true emancipation.
Yeah, so we had, of course, education is something I wanted to mention. With the development of not just the primary level education system, but a number of secondary schools being constructed late 19th century into the early 20th century. And then some of our young scholars, largely those of African descent, who took to the education system faster than those of Indian descent who would have gone abroad, gotten their degrees, their first degrees, and come back home. And some of them got involved in these labor movements and agitation for better political representation. And so you had this African educated class across the Caribbean in this period of the 1930s, 1940s, that were finding themselves in the local legislature in positions, and also agitating for change to bring us into that period of independence. And so I think this is a very critical period in terms of persons of African descent entrenching themselves in the political space. And that will not change moving into the 21st century, But I think there was a significant development there in that period of time because of the significant increased access to tertiary level education that put them in that space. Yeah.
A whole breed of those people came into the civil service in the 50s and 60s and so on. And as you're talking about the 1930s, if we go back to mid-19th century, a little bit after, and we had the phenomenon of J.J. Thomas, a black intellectual emerging even far back as that period of time.
And as you mentioned that, Tony, let us look at something. Before the turn of the century coming into the 1900s, we had the attempt to suppress the cultural expressions.
Yeah.
And we had the Kambule riots, and we also had the Jose massacre in South. And neither of those things was exclusively one race or the other. Everybody was involved. And when we go beyond that, here the colonial authorities still trying to suppress people's cultural expression. When we come to the turn of the century, people's right to vote. Imagine people were told you can't vote if you can't speak English properly. So how do we have people who more recently from India speaking Bhojpuri Hindi and they can't get the right to vote because they can't speak English, and you have former enslaved people speaking Patois and so on, and they say, well, you can't talk English, so you can't vote either. Then there were questions of property rights to allow you to have the right to vote and to participate in the politics. So all of these things had to be overcome. And there's an aspect of the early 1900s coming up the road, which is the question of the literature, the development of the literature. And it came to a head with the Beacon publications, with C.L.R. James and these other guys writing.
Mendes and company.
Yeah, Minty Ali and all these things coming up the road. So all the time, alongside the fight for economic and political rights, there's also the fight for the right to have the cultural expressions and to have them recognized.
Dr. Murray, moving forward from, let's say, the whole business of the franchise, and we're talking about Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed the countries around the Caribbean, Jamaica a little bit before Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and others subsequently. How significant was that, and what do you see that as part of the movement from slavery and the whole business of emancipation?
Are you talking about here the right to vote?
Yeah.
A significant development, of course. Have we? I think the issue more lies with our political structures more than the right to vote. Of course, the right to vote is critical for any democracy. But I think our political structures have been an Achilles heel in our development, more so. The two-party system, the British mold in which our political parties would have framed themselves largely, the bureaucracy involved in British culture. I think these are the things more so that would have stifled, to some degree. We have made significant progress, but I think these are the things that have stifled to some degree our progress and our development across the British West Indies. And of course, most of our leaders in the British Caribbean the British ensured, and to some extent the Americans as well, that those who took the reins of power initially were British subjects. Toward the line, they followed along the British way in which things should be done. So any socialist type of organization, as you would have seen in Guyana, for instance, with Chedi Jagan, all right, they wanted to avoid those types of parties coming to the fore to bring some level of radical change to the politics and the society. And I think that more so has been the challenge or the issue with regards to some significant changes that we still desire in the region.
And the labor movement, Clyde, was part of that.
Tony, one minute. I have a question from someone here.
Okay,
and
sure.
we wanted to find out how many persons that we have, how many African persons that go abroad, study, and come back with PhDs in African studies. Do we have many people like that? That is what the person was asking.
Okay. Dr. Murray can answer that, I'm sure.
And I don't know if I was certain I could answer, but
let's start with you. Where did you do your PhD, here or abroad?
Right here. I did everything right here at the University of the West Indies. Right. But we'd have had a number of scholars before my time that are now largely retired that would have gone abroad and studied. One is coming, this guy who lost Walter Rodney, who would have been assassinated, unfortunately. He was one of those.
We talked about Ryan a moment ago. Ryan went to the University of Toronto, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
That historian who studied Marcus Garvey, name doesn't come immediately to me. Jeffers, not Jeffers. I'll remember in a moment. He did something. He did a focus on Marcus Garvey. I'm sure I have his book here somewhere. Here it is. The Jewish Onslaught by Tony Martin. Tony Martin went abroad. He never came back, as far as I'm aware, permanently. Towards the end, when he had retired, but he came back at some point. He would surely come back and do a number of lectures. That's when I met him sometime 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, Fitzroy Batiste, I think, would have studied abroad. Dr. Claudius Fergus would have done, I believe, trying to remember. Then some studies abroad. I don't know if his actual degrees. I think his actual degrees was granted by University of the West Indies. But he's also another prominent scholar on African issues that he would have spent some time abroad as well. So we have some that I am aware of.
Fitzbaptiste, where did he study? I don't.
Yeah, I can't recall off the bat at the moment. Yeah.
Very cool. But Tony, the issue here is this. Dr. Murray mentioned the question of the political parties and having the colonial mindset and patterning themselves on the British parties and so on. But long before that, we had parties in Trinidad and Tobago that are not of that mold.
Right.
So when you had the Butler party and you had these guys, Butler actually won an election. And these guys were not in a formal party. They were like a coalition of candidates fighting election. They won a majority. The colonial authority said we can't have that fella in the LegCo leading. So they went and they put the Portuguese man to lead the LegCo. And then you had, of course, Williams, who was schooled in Britain and also trained in the US. So he was the preeminent man for the transition to from colonialism to neo-colonialism in terms of his historical role.
Yes.
And when we look at these organizations, you had people like APT James in Tobago, who was fighting for Tobago self-government, for autonomy, and not autonomy, in terms of actual separation and so on. But he came to Trinidad and he was organizing oil workers down in the Southwest. So, and he was also a businessman. So all these things, people crisscross these barriers that we try to erect, that somebody is in this thing. We try to think of us as being in silos. It's either you're a trade unionist, or you're a politician, or you're a businessman, or you're this or that. But when we look back over the history in Trinidad and Tobago of the participation of the former enslaved people in the life of Trinidad and Tobago, people were all over the place. So C.L.R. James was in the politics, but he was also an author, a novelist, and so on and so on. So that,
and a cricket commentator.
Kind of things that I think, we speak about people understanding our history, and some people want to talk about the history of Africa. I suppose that's why people ask about African studies, but we don't even understand our own history here in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is sad, because take, for example, Lancelot Lane fought almost single-handedly for the declaration of this holiday we're celebrating tomorrow. And in the celebration itself, he has almost been written out of its history. And that history is not more than a couple decades old.
Yeah. Okay, so Chalo, I want you to look for a Calypso by Chalkdust. I don't know the formal name of it, but one the line, the focus is that he wanted his grandfather back pay. He thought he was, duped out of it, and if we could play that at some point in time, that can be interesting. But let me go to Dr. Murray and also Clyde Weatherhead to find out. What do you think of the position of the African in the societies of the Caribbean? And of course, we have to start at home here in Trinidad and Tobago. Have all those advances and developments and the bold ventures of the generations before the present generation, have those efforts been updated, developed upon, or has there been some slippage of the effort of emancipation? Dr. Murray.
Yeah, complex question and a bit of a complex response. I think to a large degree we have made significant strides. When we think about culture, for instance, which Professor Liverpool would have started off talking about, calypso music becoming very prominent before independence, 1930s, 40s, moving onwards. At the time of independence, calypso was a major driver of nationalism, supported by the Eric Williams government at the time, with in 1962 itself having the Calypso Monarch competition, supporting that. And so Calypso music would have been, spreading across the globe, popular at a point in North America. And of course, Sparrow's role in that, Lord Kitchener's role in that as well. Coming off of that soca music being booted in late 1970s by Ras Shorty I, and how Super Bloom would have, really catapulted soca music more so to the forefront on a national level, Caribbean level, and as we get more into the 21st century with globalization taking place, how Marshall Montano and Kes Defentel and all of these other soca artists have helped to push the music forward, Bunji Garlin, of course, as well. So I think, to me, in my estimation of just music, calypso, soca music, chutney music, I think we have made significant strides, and that is something that came out of the African community in our society. I think in the area of business, as you mentioned before, we have seen significant strides with education. People of African descent have held some of the highest offices as CEOs of large corporations, locally, regionally as well. So I think to a large extent we have grown on the backs of our ancestors. I think as a society, sometimes we like to harp on the negative. Negative news tends to sell. And so in line with that, I would say that we do have a challenge still within the African community, especially with some of those young men in some of these areas. I myself came from an area that would have been considered what you call them a hotspot, a marginalized community. But I would say that majority of people in these communities are law-abiding citizens who want to see their community do well. But we have, a minority that have not really found their identity, and that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing. Lacking an identity, and it's part of the 10-point plan of the reparations committee, chaired by Professor Beckles. That loss of a cultural identity to a degree through the experience of enslavement. Some of these young men are still have been struggling to find an identity. And on the same point of the music, we see the negative side of that as well, with of course reggae music being booted and carrying Afrocentric perspectives. But then of course dancehall came into the scene, and then after dancehall, not after dancehall, in dancehall itself, you had violent lyrics infiltrating into the genre, and I don't think it has augured well for those particular youths within our community who have been, really fighting for an identity and facing socioeconomic challenges.
What of economic advance? And if we go back to 1970, when NJAC was talking about, there's a pamphlet that exists, don't remember the name of it, talking about the commanding heights of the economy. Then, of course, all of the multinational corporations were multinational corporations and not Trinidad corporations. And then into the period of today, and you look at the economic advance that has been made by other groups of citizens, and that is not a denial of their rights so to do, but I'm talking about how the emancipated African has done in terms of economic development, the gathering of wealth, and all of those things. Gentlemen, both of you, any one of you to start off.
Yeah, I'll allow my
colleague. Let me put it this way. 1970 was a reaction to the so-called promise of independence. 1970, 8 years after independence, it was 10, 15, 20 years later. It's 8 years after. So that people had an expectation that they were given, that independence would mean something. But the young people were saying, well, look, we're more unemployed than we were before. In fact, the oil industry went through a slump from 1961 coming into independence. And the notion of how our economy was to develop based on this industrialization by invitation and all these kinds of notions never benefited the masses of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So the multinationals, particularly when we look at the oil industry, look right now, Chevron left here in 2003 and said we can't find oil in Trinidad, but they want to come back now in a secret deal outside of bidding for the deepwater of the East Coast. So these multinationals have control. Tate and Lyle was in charge of sugar. Everything from the ships that carry the sugar to Britain to the planting of the cane in Trinidad and all of that was under their control. So we moved from a British colony with British multinationals dominating us to being an American neo-colony with American multinationals dominating the biggest part of our economy. And when you think of it, I mean, just when it was last year or 2 years ago, we talking to the Americans about getting a license to get oil from our neighbors in Venezuela. The Americans don't own Venezuela. Why are we getting a license from them and not from the Venezuelans? So where is our sovereignty? Where is our, and Dr. Murray mentioned the question of identity. Are we developing our own definition of ourselves, or are we succumbing to another definition of us by somebody else? The British defined us as non-humans. We were chattel, we were property. Now the Americans define us as criminals, as bad boys, and so on, and we fall for that culture. So we have a problem of defining ourselves. And when you go back, 1937 was an attempt to begin to define ourselves. Then you had coming into independence, when Granger and they created Pegasus, it was trying to define what they call the national purpose and defining us. Williams, of course, said, well, nah, the only people who could define Trinidad and Tobago and how we must develop is the PNM. So that opportunity was taken from us again. The fight for the carnival, the Kambule, as Lancelot Lane calls it, we are in the midst of even having that defined as the last Minister of Culture and the head of the NCC, Gypsy, used to say, Carnival is an experience for the foreigners to come here, an experience fed from Boxing Day to Ash Wednesday. That is not what Carnival is. We have lost the definition of it.
Yeah. Let me get Dr. Murray on the business of the wealth of the country. Yes, the transnationals, yes, the foreigners, and so on. But internally, there is wealth in the country which has been. Let me do pre-position it. How has the African man, and again, I make the point that's not a racist statement. That's a statement of saying that the African man who has been here and went through the whole exercise of emancipation, education, political power over the period of time into the 19th and 20th century and into the 21st century, sometimes and sometimes not. There is a sense that he's been left behind in terms of gathering economic wealth and economic power.
Yeah, it goes back to one of the things that I mentioned before, networking. And I think that is something that some of the other ethnic groups or racial groups in our society did. I mean, some of them are smaller groups, so it's perhaps easier to network and galvanize their resources against those who might be seeking to get a share But the reality is, when the British who were living here and running our affairs realized that independence was approaching, they amalgamated themselves. They formed a quote unquote elite class. They shared the same religion. They married within, giving that level of validation to the plural society theory from M.G. Smith to a large extent. And because of that networking that they did, they were able to pool resources to be prepared to benefit from the resources that we had here, particularly in the energy and sector and in infrastructure and all of these things. But they did not do it individually. And I think somewhere along the line, the African started to do things on an individual level with distrust, with not taking the larger community into consideration in that. I think also perhaps the push into education and having jobs and careers, may have also stymied that entrepreneurial progress to some degree on that level as well. And so I sort of accredit to that. I don't know what.
But Dr. Murray, not to contradict you,
sure.
But when I look at education and the results of education in our time, sometimes I see the common entrance results, whatever it's called now, the secondary school exam results, the university graduation 2 years or something like that ago. I went to my son's graduation with a postgraduate degree, and being the reporter I am, I scrutinized the graduates from the master, from the first degree right up to the PhD level. And I must tell you that Black people were lacking in not that they were not there, but they were there in minor numbers. So that, when you go back to the era of Williams himself and Hugh Wooding and James and all those people, and you see now, you look at the education results now, and there is a worry there.
Fair point. Right.
Yes, Clyde.
Yeah, Tony, you see the point, people make these comparisons and we resort to either being chauvinistic to say either we better than them or they better than us or some kind of crap like that. Let us look at history and reality. Satmaraj was a triumvirate. He was the political leader, he was the labor leader, and he was the
religious leader,
all in one. There is no comparable leader among the people of African origin in this country. So when we talk about history and how things develop, we have not had that kind of cohesion, partly at the level of the leadership. No, and because of that, we have not been able, in a real sense, to define ourselves. And therefore, other people keep defining us, and we accepting the definitions. So remember earlier somebody talked about, people said post-emancipation that the ex-slaves were lazy. Well, we in 2025 and people saying the same damn thing.
Yeah.
So why are we not defining ourselves? We have people come up after 1970 to now, and Jack converted itself into this organization that is doing a lot of cultural work and so on and so on. And emancipation celebration itself has become a celebration rather than a redefinition of the Africans in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is the sad thing.
You know, talking
Because
about Sat
we don't
Maraj,
have leaders in all these spheres at the same personalities. We will never have that cohesion of thinking that we need to have.
right? Very good point. Talking about Satmaraj and his efforts at promoting his people. And once again, I make the point, he had every right so to do. Like every other group in the society, they had a right to promote themselves. Satmaraj told me in an interview, we had a good relationship, you know. He disagreed with everything I said, and I disagreed with everything that he said. But we never fought. He never refused to talk to me and so on. He said to me one day, Tony, that must have been in the 80s. He says the organization has a plan to take over the media through putting their own people into the media. If you look at television now, if you scan the newspapers now, you will see the outcome of that effort. So what I'm saying is that while other people, we talk about the 1%, the 1% has gathered itself together and has a focus. I don't know about black people, you know.
Yeah, but
It
Tony,
pains me, but that's true.
yeah, but Tony, you have to see the history behind it as well, which has led to us being segmented and not unified in that way. Some came as enslaved. They were then socialized to become Christian. Some came free, trying to practice African religion, taken away from their homelands, mixed up with persons from different tribes. So from the very get-go, it has always been a group of people with different ways of living, different languages, and so on, trying to find themselves as one unit to identify, as opposed to the other groups, whether they were smaller in number, as we call it 1%. And so, just like the Chinese, they network and they do their thing. Even in regards to persons of Indian descent, you're largely Hindu. 88% of those indentured Indians were Hindu. They had their freedoms, and they had the same struggles against the colonial establishment. So it was easier for them to unify because they had less differences amongst themselves. And so having a leader, because where did Satmaraj gain his authority from? He gained it from the SDMS, right? um, that one group formed in 1952 that now incorporated largely, fundamentalist Sanatanist beliefs, and so they became that leadership vehicle for the Indian community. But the African community has, maybe I can argue, has never really had that.
Cohered.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what just struck me?
Tony, let me just make this point.
Yeah,
When you
sure.
look at what I mentioned just now, that SAT represented the triumvirate. The only African leader that I could think of in our own history here that resembled that was Butler. Butler was the politician, he was the trade unionist, he was also a religious leader.
He was a Baptist preacher.
And look at 1930s compared to beyond that thing.
I think now the Emancipation Support Committee has a role that they can play if this is what the African community desires. I think with all of the platforms that we have now, that is, you're not relying on the established media houses for you to get your voice out. You have social media platforms that you can utilize. I find that they should be one of the major players in terms of leading positions on issues within the African community. Sometimes you see it in the political realm where persons would say things that may offend one ethnic group or racial group, and there's somebody, meaning not someone, but or somebody, but a body that comes out and makes a statement on behalf of that entire ethnic group. But when things are said, even more glaring and disrespectful to the African community with clear undertones of racism, there's no particular voice that speaks on behalf of the African community, and therefore there is no apology that comes. There's no relenting of these things. So I think perhaps we may need some institution or person to be a voice.
Chalo, just let me ask you, have you been able to find the piece that I talk about?
Actually, I kind of missed it. What it is that you were actually asking for?
Okay, well, as I said, it's about Choctaw singing about he wants his grandfather back pay. I don't know what the formal name of it is.
Formal name of it is, I can't actually place it, but I run a quick check.
Yeah, he was talking about living in Stolmeyer lands, and everybody get lands, and the African people ain't get no land, etc., as he would say. But anyhow, gentlemen, I want to thank you. We got to leave now. I want to thank you very much, and I consider this one chapter in the whole emancipation story. There's so much more to be understood and said in a ways that people get an understanding of each other. One point I make as I go that has been swirling around in my head a moment ago. I remember Prime Minister Rowley back in, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a breakout of some serious violence in the Lavantil area. And he set up a committee to look at it and for possible economic ventures, social ventures. Well, boy, I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't remember what came out of it.
I have the same question, Tony. It was after I believe it was after the little rioting that occurred with the extrajudicial killing of the 3 men in Mova that was recorded on camera. He said that the previous under Patrick Manning, during their time as the government, they had a plan, but they were somewhat afraid that the opposition and the rest of the society would think that money was being, just funneled in a biased manner towards these marginalized communities. And then he did say, no, he is going to address it, regardless of what people may think. And I saw that they had a launch at some point, an official launch, but since then, nothing.
Yeah. The only thing I remember coming out of it is that they talked about it. I'm not sure they did anything about it.
Yeah,
a piece of land in the going into Lavantil, the John area, where the orange that company had produced citrus juices for a long time.
Okay.
I think the building went out of existence, and there was supposed to be a trade center or something like that built there. I don't know what became of it, but perhaps that's
Tony, I can tell you nothing came of it, because some people I spoke with in the Lavantil area said that they were never brought in to the discussion about what was to be set up on that piece of land. So again, as Dr. Murray just said, the PNM say we have the plan, we have the policy, we have it. It's the same definition that Williams came with in 1962. That the only way Trinidad and Tobago could develop is if the PNM say how to do it.
Yes, PNM or confusion, gentlemen. We got to go. Thank you very much for the discussion, and I hope we don't, and I'm speaking now for myself, I hope I don't wait for another Emancipation Day to come around 12 months from now to raise the subject. Thank you very much. Chalo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much to your guests for being here on New Era TT Radio.
In my heart, there was much to say, and I hope that the boss would have listened to me someday.